welcome to Beeler.Cast. I'm Rob Beeler. I find myself here in a magician's studio. I was just doing a little bit of work, getting ready for my next conference. I'm glad to be and excited to have a conversation with my friend Will Doherty. Will, where are you today?
I'm in my basement office, believe it or not.
You have it. I will say it's well lit for looking like that. You know. Again, meanwhile, I'm here. I'm here at the big Houdini's place, getting ready for my next conference. So it has been a busy Q1 with a lot of announcements. You know, this is an industry where you might be quiet for a week and then a whole bunch of things come up. One of the biggest in my mind for Q1 was the trade desk and what I'll call the launch of OpenPath, right? And for all of that was discussed about it, I saw a lot of articles and a lot of takes on what was going on. Reached out to Will to learn more, and we thought it'd be a good idea to dispel some myths as well as kind of establish it. In part because, again, I think people have been, I don't know if they're misinterpreting, but there's definitely some nuance to this that I think we can dive into. Will, your role is VP Inventory Development at the trade desk, correct? What does that entail? What is that? What is your remit?
Yeah, so simply put, it's I would say our strategic publisher partnerships for the trade desk, whether they're legacy media institutions or digital first publishers, born on the web, or CTV publishers, networks, broadcasters. Got it.
So I think it's important, as much as I have a feeling that many people who are going to be dialing in are cued in at certain levels of, the technical pieces or whatever. I do think it's important maybe to start with like just a kind of an overview of the trade desk and talking about the trade desk and then where OpenPath and this particular announcement comes from. Can you kind of set the stage for the role and what the plan is here?
Yeah, so just, I think most people are familiar with the trade desk. We're a DSP. We're probably the largest of our particular category. And how that relates to, OpenPath is obviously a new initiative that we announced a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks now. It all kind of blends together. Where we have taken a different stance than we have historically on how to work with publishers. Prior to this announcement, the only way in which we would be able to manifest bids to a publisher was through an existing SSP relationship. All those paths or pipes are still very much open, with one exception, which I'm sure we'll talk about. What we realized and what we've started to hear both from publishers as well as buyers is that they wanted a means to connect directly. So OpenPath, leveraging pre-bid, is just an opportunity for a publisher, if they so choose, to receive the bids from us directly. We will bid into OpenPath the same way we bid into the SSP layer. If you're a publisher that has, I'd say, the technical capabilities or capacity to manage our bid directly, then that choice is available to you. And that's really kind of it for now, full stop. It's just the opportunity to get the bids directly from us. But it does not turn off the existing SSP layer.
Got it. We're going to dive into that because I think that's the important part where people are starting to get confused, because I think when I'm reading the trades, it almost seems invariably there's this discussion again that you're doing this, you're not an SSP, but the one layer that I kind of want to talk about first is that it's a reaction or it relates to Google, and what that either that you're coming after Google or you're trying to get away from Google. And I just think that there's some piece to that of like, love to understand your perspective of what does this even have to do with Google, right? Like when you just laid that out, you were talking about buyers to sellers and more direct connection. But it's always put in the context of Google. And I think it's hard not to talk about Google in our space. How does this relate to Google?
Well, it's related in the sense that we're being much more, I'd say, intentional about the supply chain than maybe we have been in the past, at least in terms of the decisions that we want to make. And open bidding, just based on a lot of the lawsuits and unredacted filings and all these things, um, uh, really became a problematic integration from our standpoint, where we weren't really sure what privileges may or may not have been granted to other parties. And so if, win rates are being established or benchmarked for other buyers, that means that even if we had the best bid, we don't necessarily win because some other commercial agreement needs to be satisfied. And we also think that it played into a larger commodification of certain categories of publishers that we don't think were good long term. And so when we talked about leveraging pre-bid to work with publishers directly, where it made sense, there was a focus on journalistic entities, kind of capital J journalism. That was really important, that they have often not been the beneficiaries of changes in the supply chain. And so if we were going to make a choice to do this, that was the cohort or the group that we really wanted to start with. So it wasn't necessarily organized by scale or size. It was really about like the sort of the journalistic bona fides of those companies. And that's like an important dimension of this, that the trade desk, based on our own point of view and our buyer's point of view, is that they endeavor to have a more direct relationship with publishers, that they didn't want the supply chain to be this somewhat like pseudo-anonymous pool of inventory where they didn't really completely understand where all of their ad dollars were going. And that they wanted to have more one-to-one relationships with with publishers. And so OpenPath seemed like a logical conclusion or next step for us to make.
And so, and I'm thinking which avenue to go down. There's so much of this, right? So how do you manage this with your SSP partners, right? So in other words, or to the two SSPs, you're saying you're not an SSP.
Mm-hmm.
You are going direct through pre-bid. You're hooking into it as if you were an SSP. But you have to obviously draw that line of what is an SSP versus OpenPath. I think that's something I'd love to understand more.
Yeah, I think SSPs do a lot of things and provide a lot of tooling and services to publishers that we're never going to do. They also manage demand across a ton of different DSPs, marketers, buyer types. That's not something we would provide either. They have to help publishers make a lot of decisions about what's the best possible outcome based on whatever bids that they receive, and make sure that that has an additive impact on their overall revenue or yield. So when we talk about we're not providing yield services, like we think those are pretty critical things that some of the larger scaled SSPs provide to publishers today. But we're not going to be providing any of those things. The only thing that OpenPath will allow for publishers to do is, if they have those capabilities internally, if they can take our bid and then compare it across other bids that they receive from other sources, they can make a decision on, is this the best possible outcome for me and I want to do it. But we're not providing any of those other services. And it also makes the use case for OpenPath somewhat more narrow than what an SSP would be able to do. Not every publisher has the technical capacity or ability to work with us directly. We're not really in a position, nor do we desire to cover anything like the entire surface area that an SSP covers today. And that we're still beholden to the marketer at the end of the day. What we're doing is bidding on their behalf, and we're trying to make the best possible decision for our marketers. The benefit is a publisher can now receive that directly if they so choose. But I don't think it's a one size fits all. It won't work for every publisher. And I don't know if, I would say the other tools that SSPs provide are probably going to be still, and are now and will be in the future, just as critical.
I think that's the thing that and I'm glad I think from our earlier conversations, I understood that, and I've spent a week talking to publishers about this. And I think that that's a key part of it that, again, my take on everything you've said is that the client here is pretty clear, right? That you're working for the buyer. And for the publisher, right, who is, of course, wanting to sit there and, like, the number of people that I know that are probably knocking on your door as publishers to go, like, how do I get in? How do I do all these things? Of course, they're going to come back and go, like, yes, but can you do X for me or whatever, is really not the way this is set up. I will pick up one thing that you said, that, your focus on particular publishers and a focus on journalism and premium. You didn't use the word premium, but these particular publishers, right? I think that that's something that SSPs will have to react to, right? Because I think that there's just an aspect of everyone wanting transparency, and the way that that's been done to date has just been a losing battle for both sides. Publishers don't really understand what's being bid on, or who's bidding on them. The SSPs aren't necessarily telling the DSPs everything, and as much as this is necessarily your play, there's a little bit more of a directness of cutting through that and going, these are the types of publishers you can reach. Am I clear on that? That in other words, that for your buyers, they're going to get some sense of the publishers they can reach in this way, and that in itself will be an attractive feature? Or are you opening this up to any publisher?
Yeah, we're not opening it up to just any publisher. So we're starting with journalism, and then we'll work backwards from there in terms of, we have to sift through all the inbound that we got, which was I expected a fair amount, but it did exceed my expectations. And then we have to organize, in terms of strategic overlap. Are these the publishers that our marketers are interested in having a direct connection with? Are they even capable of doing the integration? Some aren't, some are. This doesn't replace any existing paths. This is like a very much an add, don't replace kind of scenario. So we have to go through that and just practically judge each opportunity on its own merits. But scale, premium nature of content, all those things will be really important.
Yeah. And I think, going to your part before, that there will be publishers that need SSPs. Again, there's a lot of work that they do for their clients, right? And it's going to be interesting to see how the technology layers work between what an SSP does to, as a publisher, all of the demand, and do you need that layer behind it, right, that looks a little bit more holistically, right? So in other words, I might sit there and go, like, this for me might be a reason for me to think, well, I ultimately think I'm a premium publisher. I ultimately think I want to work, and I think the trade desk can bring me incremental money. I want you in the competition. So do I build up my programmatic chops to do that? And again, is that going to be worth it? Is something I'm going to have to sit there and think about, and the SSP and my other kind of relationships, right?
Yeah, and I don't even think I would be in a position to answer that or give firm direction to any publisher on if this is the right choice for them or whether they should do it, or if they, do I invest in these capabilities or not? Every publisher is going to have to kind of think through that on their own. Our use case with them is still fairly narrow. We will bid into OpenPath the same way we bid into other SSPs. So that alone may not make a sense for a lot of publishers.
Right. Now, and again, you've been clear, and again, though, at the same time, I have a feeling you're going to continually have to repeat this for a little while until everyone understands that you are not an SSP. Mm-hmm. Where I go with it, though, is that I would think that your clients on the buy side are looking for certain features. They're looking for things that are going to help them get access to the best inventory. And that means some things where, yes, as a DSP, you have certain functionality, but then you need that other piece of it. And what comes to mind first is private auction, PMPs, PG type deals. Is that something that's available? Is that on the roadmap? How do you think about that?
Yeah, in terms of baseline functionality, we're starting with open market. We will support PMP. And I'd say we'd probably stop there. At least that's the only thing we have in the short term. OpenPath is still very much in its early phases. We thought it was important to give notice before we actually went and started to hook up. And we thought that was like an important signal that we needed to make, or change that we needed to explain. But yeah, it's still early days. But I would say, by and large, probably a lot of the tooling that publishers are getting today from SSPs, we're not looking to go and have feature parity. It's really probably beyond the scope of what we're interested in doing right now.
And is that part of the what you talk to your buyers about? Because again, that was something else I read in the trades is, well, the trade desk has to now worry about supporting the supply side and the buy side. My guess, the trade desk's roadmap for development is pretty big, and there's a lot of things that you have in the works. And that's just enough on the buy side without sitting there trying to figure out all the publisher type things you have to solve for. One thing though, for premium publishers though, creative review, things like block lists and so forth.
Yeah,
How do you
there's some, I'd
navigate
say,
that?
there are baseline functionalities that we'll support in terms of category blocks, creative review. To me, those are pretty pedestrian and requirements as far as these things go. But yeah, that would be about the extent of it for right now.
Got it. But that ties right into first-party data, publisher first-party data. Let's be clear. And as I think about the future of things with the demise of third-party cookies, all of these things that are kind of going on, one part will be is that I think buyers are going to, some are going to want to get access to publisher first-party data. Are you going to support, some of the pre-bid first-party data module, seller-defined audiences? Like, are these things that you are looking to make sure that you have capabilities around, or is that just really more a function of pre-bid and what aspects of pre-bid that you pick up on?
Yeah. Right now, I don't think we have a public point of view on seller-defined audiences or anything along those lines. And so until we do, I will say we will look at those opportunities from a buyer perspective. If this is something our marketers and our agencies feel like it's worthwhile investment, we'll have to look at it through that lens. I don't know that I understand the use case and where publishers are interested in exploring this. And from my perspective, it might be a little early on our end to kind of commit one way or the other. But whatever decision we make will be made with like a buyer in mind.
I mean, fair enough.
Align, in perfect synergy with a publisher's desires.
Right. So again, that goes to the positioning, right? That I think think about this, publishers, as you think through other questions that you have, right? What I just heard is that if brands come to you and say, hey, when we buy and we buy in this particular way, we want access to publisher first-party data. It's a major thing for us. The trade desk will respond in kind to serve those clients. And if that essentially impacts OpenPath or your integrations along these lines, that's the way that this is going to work, right?
Yeah. And I'd say it's really too early to give in to kind of lean one way or the other on that. I'm personally just getting up to speed on what that would potentially look like, both technically and also from a strategic standpoint.
Right. Got a great question here for you, quite direct. So if you're going to buy the same way via OpenPath as you do with other SSPs, doesn't that in a way kind of contradict, SPO? how do you reconcile potentially bidding against yourself? So again, if you are,
Yeah.
OpenPath is going to be one of the ways that you bid, but you're also going through SSPs. How are you reconciling that particular strategy? Does one have advantages over another?
Yeah, I mean, we have to judge it from like a strictly performance standpoint. Is our path an efficient path? And we have to look at that holistically. I think it will perform pretty well, but will it be the best path every single time? Probably not. But I also don't know of any buyer that buys exclusively from a single path effectively today. Even if it ends up being disproportionate to one or the other. We really want to maintain optionality here. One, it's important to our clients. They have the ability to sort of govern the supply paths that they use. This is another choice for them. But yeah, from our standpoint, it's all going to have to net out from a performance standpoint.
Yeah,
Otherwise, there's no point in the investment for us doing this.
right.
It's not a profit center for the trade desk. Jeff, in the earnings call a couple of weeks ago, was pretty firm about that point, and we're beholden to it. This is not a profit center. We want to run this at cost, take rate neutral for the company as a whole. So if this isn't driving performance-based efficiencies, it won't be successful.
And I think that that's a important part, right? So as again, talking with your SSPs, what work, I guess it all ultimately will come down to what works best, right? And again, for from the transaction to where you put your inventory and so forth. Now we touched on that. The one question that was asked of me, which I really thought was a great question, you addressed it somewhat, but again, to your point about the number of people who've reached out to you to participate, the next kind of question is what could a publisher do to make their inventory more desirable, more compelling to you? You mentioned journalism. Are there particular performance, I think, is ultimately going to be your answer here, but I just didn't know if there's any additional color that you could offer in terms of like looking for some kind of inventory or looking for attributes like whether it be viewability to other things. Like what does quality inventory look like to you?
Yeah, it's not exclusively performance. We want to talk to publishers that are making material investments in the content themselves. If I'd say long term, and for some folks, this inventory is fine, but there's sort of the made for advertising, long tail destinations and things like that. We have other means of getting that inventory if buyers want it. I don't know that that's going to necessarily rise to the top in terms of like we should entertain a direct integration for this type of inventory. There's enough of that, sort of probably too much of that elsewhere. So we really want to start with folks that are making an investment in content, that they have staff, that this is a key part of their value prop to their users and their consumers. So that plus, are they technically able to work with us in this capacity? Is this what they want to be doing? And does this have the kind of scale that would justify the work that goes into an integration? So I'd actually start from quality and work back. That is a really important component of this.
I think that's right. I think that's an important way again to position your inventory anyway, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. Getting some really good specific questions, and so Will, between my questions and the things that are coming in, we're going to get kind of almost to not a lightning round here. We've got a little bit of time.
Sure.
But if it doesn't feel like there's a flow to it, just know that I'm getting some really good questions, and I know you're ready for this, right? When using OpenPath, will you have visibility to see context and the viewability in real time before placing the bid? In other words, with the integration that you are getting that kind of information so that you're buying based on context and viewability?
Yeah. Viewability is a really important part of how Trade Desk bids today. So that wouldn't change. Context, I would have to punt on that one. I don't know if that is how much of that is organic to the platform or, third-party services that buyers use. I know this is like a hot button ad tech Twitter topic right now, so I don't want to misspeak, but like I'd say from my lens, the context isn't really a consideration. Viewability always will be, because it's such an important part of the performance paradigm for our marketers. Yeah, so I'd have to probably circle back on the context question. I don't think I can specifically answer it.
It's
Some
funny.
of them.
When I asked the question, all I was thinking about was the Twitter conversations going on around about that right now. So yes, but I think it's something that context. This again goes to, I kind of alluded to it. When we do think about the end of third-party cookies, and again, almost regardless of the timing of it, the industry is moving toward ID-based solutions, authentication. It's looking about context, is trying to determine who determines context, first-party data, second-party data, clean rooms, all of these things are creating, I don't see a future where we're not having a lot of fragmented pieces of how all of these things kind of come together and get a full picture. How do you think about the end of third-party cookies and where we're going as an industry, and where the trade desk and or OpenPath fit into, let's say, a year, 2 years? I know, again, this is early days, Will. I won't put you on the spot too much, but I am thinking philosophically, where does this all go?
Yeah. Well, there's a few parts there, and I'm probably answering this more as, from my own vantage than sort of
Yeah,
specific
please.
trade desk perspective. I tend not to think of ad tech or even the market in general and sort of these zero sum binaries that I think is often how they're discussed. One, what is winning, what lost? I think there's going to be a fair amount of choice. I don't know that anybody can accurately predict what the day one looks like post cookie, other than the internet will work and function very differently. Publishers that previously have had no need to have some sort of authentication or login with their users, that's going to change. The cost loss benefit will potentially be upended from what its historical norms are. To what extent, no one can 100% say. I just know it will be different. But I also know too, just as from a consumer, the idea that behaviorally we've all changed quite a bit. I did the COVID trifecta, right? Like I had a kid, I moved out to the suburbs, I took a new job, I did the whole thing, I did the whole reboot. And part of getting a house, we needed a TV for a couple rooms that we didn't have, going from a small apartment. I log into everything. I look at my phone, 90% of where I'm getting my content, I'm logged into it. The friction of doing that is just fundamentally different than it's ever been. So I do think we retain addressability. And I do think a key part of that will have to be, some solutions will have to be interoperable. If we try to just coalesce around a single solution and not standards, I think that's going to make things a lot harder. In the short term, I think it's really hard for people to figure out what bets do I want to make, because you're not going to make one, you're going to make a few. And obviously we are making a pretty large bet with UID, and that will continue to be a strong focal point of the company, is really important. It's really important to our marketers who have adopted it as their standard. But we don't see it as being the only solution. So on the contextual piece, I think it does start to play a role in different ways, and if we're thinking of cohorting and other things, but until we can test it with the absence of cookies, I don't know how much we're really going to know. Meaning, I remember early days of all the identity solutions when they're coming out, whether it was LiveRAM ATS or M1 and all those things. It was like, this works, but so don't cookies. And cookies are a lot easier right now. And so until the easy button goes away, I don't know how much we're really going to be able to understand what kind of behavioral change and which kinds of solutions that the market ends up collaborating more closely on.
I couldn't agree with that. Preach, because I just keep thinking that, like, the world without third-party cookies and our ability to test and understand what works. You can work out some infrastructure now, right? And make sure that you have the paths, and you might do some testing or whatever. But, the analogy I've always used is, like, right now our diet is almost 100% candy or just, cookies, right? And cookies in both senses. And now this change comes along, we're going to be eating some broccoli here. And until then, it will not taste good. It's not going to work. But at some point, you wind up realizing it's what we need.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think we're going to be ready. Like, it's going to happen. It may be an uncomfortable transition. The only advice I would give to folks now is we are just rounding out the Q1 here. It's going to be the summer soon. We're seeing people are going to want to come out and do things again, and we have been living in a pandemic a couple of years, so hopefully people have very fun vacation-filled summers. But then September is going to be here really quick,
Mm-hmm.
and then October and November are here. And my experience is a lot of these things do not happen in November and December for obvious reasons. So there isn't a lot of time, and I would say for folks taking care of contracts, legal requirements, starting to do that, where you have to do that now. You do not have all the time in the world. And if everybody tries to rush at the end or come January and go, we're ready, not everybody else might not be ready for you. Sheer capacity constraints may put you outside looking in, and that's not going to be a good place to be. So that would be my only, strong advice for folks, is to start moving now if you haven't already. You don't have that much time.
100% agree. And I keep trying to work with publishers to get them to understand that Q4 is what you prep for now. Because, again, strategic decisions and all that kind of stuff have to be continually made, and agree with that. Some other great questions that are coming in. This one is, will OpenPath and the trade desk pay publishers directly? So how does the payment work in terms of the publisher piece? And is it a rev share? Is it a fee? Can you be clear as to that, to the level of contractual, agreements?
So we'll pay directly, and we'll pay you net of our support costs, which will be documented in the contract. So as if you're one of the publishers that gets in the queue and we start working with you directly, all this would be documented in the agreement.
With you pulling out of Google OB, do you foresee further consolidation spend into only one or two SSPs per geo?
I don't think so. I don't think the market is running at that kind of efficiency right now where that would be possible or viable. I've seen things go the other way. We're not seeing massive consolidation. We're seeing massive duplication and a lot of sort of inflationary measures being taken. So request volume is not starting to condense across publishers. It's sort of metastasizing. So I would say, just looking at the trending, we'd have to see it go the other way before I could ever envision a world of one or two SSPs. And then those SSPs would be like highly scaled, low margin, high volume. They would become the NASDAQ and the NYSE of programmatic, respectively. But we have a ways to go before that could be a reality. I think that would be advantageous long term, and I have no sight lines on who would ultimately be the winners there. But yeah, I don't think that's a reality anytime soon.
It's a really interesting perspective on that. Outside of OpenPath, the decision to exit OB is material to a lot of pubs. how is TTD thinking about connecting to the high quality pubs that are dependent on those channels? What suggestions do you have for them? Which I guess, to your earlier point, you're not just buying directly through OpenPath. You are still going to have to work with SSPs. It goes off that last point,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a premium publisher, you still will get trade desk dollars coming your way, right? I'm trying to think if there's a subtlety to that question in case something comes to mind other than obviously work with your SSPs to improve your message,
Yeah, if you're OB exclusive, and which would probably imply that you wouldn't necessarily be a strong candidate for OpenPath, I would start to talk to other SSPs about how you could create some optionality for yourself. It's probably just good for your business anyway. And then the cases where you know, I can't think of any, but like if there were real extreme edge cases, we'd have to evaluate those on a case by case basis. But years ago, the trade desk made a really important decision to have SSPs and publishers pick a lane effectively instead of giving us pre-bid and OB and something else and something else. It was like, please pick one lane. And we saw the non-OB paths overwhelmingly be selected. So in terms of, as this relates specifically to the trade desk, the shift, the beginnings of this, and I'd say most of that happened years ago.
Got it. Will you still see the minimum bid to win if it moves into OpenPath? I don't know if I can give you much more context. Do you understand that?
In the mid bid to win in the bid request itself.
Yeah.
I don't see why we wouldn't, but I'll confirm with the technical account team to make sure that we would read that, but I don't see why we wouldn't. Unless that's almost like universally set on the SSP level, then we would have to think about where that fits in. But we certainly want to not burn bids on opportunities we can't win because it doesn't hit a publisher's floor. That would just be wasteful. But I can get back to whoever asked the question.
Yeah, yeah, I think that might be worthwhile. The other part when it comes, circling all the way back to the PMP question, right, is I know that that's on the roadmap. Are you thinking of that in terms of the tool sets to allow for, to create those PMPs? Are we logging in to like a OpenPath UI, or are we, how do you foresee that interface, right? Because now we're going beyond you just being an adapter in pre-bid to needing some ability to define the deals. Do you have some sense of how that might be?
I have some sense of it, but it's nothing I would share right now, just because until that's really ready,
Fair enough.
I wouldn't want to necessarily commit or frame it in a certain way, and then we make a different decision as we get closer to actually supporting it. But yeah, I'd be curious what everybody's preference is on that one. That we are looking to work with on OpenPath, but yeah, nothing I could speak to right now.
Yeah, if that makes sense, again, that might be something that comes out of this. If you're looking for feedback from the publisher community, again, you have the direct relationships, but if there's something where helping kind of pull that together could be useful, which I think ties to my next question, right? Which I think I know we kind of already answered it, but I almost kind of like, I'm doing this to almost reinforce the point. Well, things like seller-defined audiences, you already kind of answered that, right? But to me, things like buyers.json, demand chain object, all of these things are these initiatives that is trying to create some transparency in the marketplace. And of course, for publishers, have real benefits. Buyers.json is an example of something that helps us identify who is actually buying. Isn't just a commercial thing, it's about the security of the overall system, right? Mm-hmm. And it's something where, as the trade desk as a DSP is not something that publishers have had a relationship with you to try and help use your power in the marketplace to move some of the things forward, right? So I look at it and go like, you ultimately will come back with the answer of, it depends on what the buyers want, right? And I think that there's a part there, Will, where your role might essentially be a little bit of how can we work with you to get buyers to understand that we can even give them better, inventory and better world, if you will, in digital advertising if we can get behind certain initiatives.
Mhm.
And so I look at that and just go like, do you see that as part of your role, right? In other words, should we, as publishers, we know we're not going to win with you to make you an SSP. I say that, and you can hear a lot of gears going, right? Because I'm trying to position the question correctly. But again, the trade desk has weight in this industry to an extent that you can help set standards or make standards happen. UID is a consideration because the trade desk did it and handled it the way they did. Are there things there that you kind of see as something that, hey, if I talk to publishers and they're telling me they can get me better stuff for my buyers, let's build it. Let's make those things happen.
Yeah, I am interested in looking at standards that sort of encourage the same level of transparency that we want from the supply chain. We are having those conversations internally about what that would mean, the importance of it, and where our role ultimately would be. So I'd say that that's a dialogue that's very much open. To me, regardless of OpenPath, that's a question that would be asked of the buy side. That has nothing to do with that particular initiative in terms of supporting a standard. Those standards would transcend any sort of pre-bid plumbing that we decide to initiate, right? Like standards have applications that are beyond just those narrow use cases. So we would look at those and want to hear from our publisher partners on why that is. I am very much in the belief that when we invest in premium content providers and that giving them better telemetry on their commercial partners on the buy side so that they can have more direct partnerships and relationships, buyers and publishers, that's a good thing. So I say philosophically, I'm probably aligned with a lot of those. But as a company, I don't think we've taken any public stance yet.
Got it. It might just be an interesting conversation because I think that there's kind of bluntly, right? Like, I get why the trade desk needs to, and you need to be focused on the buyer side. That is ultimately your client, period. And again, this has allowed you to create an avenue that has efficiencies in terms of cost, as cuts out a lot of the layer. But at the same time, it's like, it's hard to foresee this as just being like a dumb pipe, right? In other words, I get why you're not going to build the infrastructure to do all that a Magnite does, because again, like that means you are going to have two clients and dual, parity of features becomes, you could lose that game, and there's no reason to even play that game, if you will, right? But there is a part of this that I'm just sitting there trying to think through of like, it just seems hard to be like it's a take it or leave it type of thing without sitting there trying to, us figure out what the buyers need and what the publishers need to kind of bring this stuff together so that it's just a smarter industry. It's a smarter transaction, right? So I think that's the part that I keep always coming back to you on of like, are you hearing this from your buyers? Because I'd love to see them do that. We have to talk to buyers, fine. But we've got to, obviously, there's a lot of work in the industry to be done, I think is the part where I'm going with this. And I just sit there and think that it just feels like you've created a spot where we could really start to create a more streamlined transaction that I just love to see go beyond take it or leave it into a much more, impactful part of the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of my role here at the trade desk is to not sort of be disintermediated from publisher conversations or partnerships via the technology that we use. And that the reason I'm here and that my team exists is so that we can better understand where, not that we have the publisher's interest per se at the tip of what we're trying to do, but that we have shared interests that we should start to explore. And that really becomes a sort of the galvanizing principle for what we're trying to do, is not that we have the same interests, but we share common interests in other areas. Or I should say that differently. We don't represent your interests, but we have shared interests that we need to explore and partner on and understand, because that's better for the ecosystem. And things like UID are certainly representative of that. And that's why I'm here. So I encourage folks, and I may, based on my LinkedIn messages, yeah, many people are taking the opportunity to say hi and start those relationships. So, and that's what we're here for. We want to talk to publishers and understand their concerns and things like that. And we will always still approach it from the best interest of our buyers, but we think there's a lot of opportunity to partner here.
Great, great, and I think that's so helpful to know that that's kind of getting your role, and makes it a reason to reach out, right, and to talk to you and get consensus around certain things. To me, that's part of the problem. Of course, is you're getting hit probably from 1,000 directions with 1,000 requests, and there's a bit of that of working through that to figure out what those shared interests are. I mean, that's ultimately the thing here. I think I sometimes have to remind some of the publishers I talk with is, the buy side does have, there's coming together as an industry, and at the same time, a buyer will always want to get what they want for the lowest price. Not necessarily an unfair price, but the lowest price, right? As any one of us does when we go buy a car or do whatever. You do it in your own self-interest. And so the key is to make it as efficient and as transparent to the level that makes the industry thrive and make people be able to do good things. So, yeah, so I think, we covered a lot of ground. And I think the one thing that, Will, I'm tapping into your experience as, at an index exchange, to obviously in this particular role, and you've been at this in a while, and you're seeing kind of a leader, and you already touched on a couple of them, but I didn't know if we left anything unsaid. Any idea in terms of like what you see with the industry and what you can choose, what either technology companies should do, what publishers should be doing, where should people be investing their time or their intentions to succeed in the world that you see coming ahead for our industry?
That's a great question. So I will selfishly advocate for UID because it's a critical initiative to us, and the success that we're seeing both in terms of adoption but just overall performance is significant enough to make that I think worthwhile. And so on that end, I do think, but obviously, I think you need to invest in multiple choices as a publisher. But we'd love to make sure that UID is part of that. So I think having your plan in place for a post-cookie reality is important. And then I would say one of the things that I'm seeing trending, and we hear this talked about in I'd say a lot of different ways. But this is maybe the biggest shift that I've observed, and it was a big reason why I was excited to take this role at Trade Desk, is I do think we're becoming, from a supply chain standpoint, one, obsessed with the efficiency of the supply chain. And that's something that's not specific to Trade Desk, but the market as a whole. And that's largely good. The efficiencies that are born out of that process will transfer back to the edges, publisher and marketer alike. And that was similar to my feeling when I was at Index and now here at Trade Desk. I see that trend going in the right direction long term. But the other thing that's really big is that the market becomes more seller centric. And what that I mean is that marketers very much want to start to put their arms around content providers and people investing in content in a way that they think better elevates their brand story and their market message. And I think in the early days of programmatic, data sort of overrode a lot of content-driven decisions. Did it perform? Was there a cookie present? It's addressable, kind of agnostic to the publisher. I don't think that agnosticism is going to persist long term. And I actually think the death of cookies will shrink the value of that kind of content experience because it will sort of decay the relevancy of it from a data perspective. And so I do see that part of it shifting dramatically over the next year or two. It'll be one of those things I think that will sort of, maybe it'll be 2 years from now. Maybe we'll be back at CES. Maybe that'll actually happen again. I know it did a little bit this year.
Mm-hmm.
I wimped out. I didn't go. But that will be more the reality that we live in, and that people will think about, doing deals with publishers, not necessarily, and running those on pipes, not doing a deal with the pipes instead of the publisher. And that's where I largely see this manifesting.
Fantastic. All right, probably the most important question that I can ask you, and I will say from the start that during the pandemic and be, in the last couple of years, I really have not invested in my Blazers. I've kind of let that go. As we get back into reality, as we get back in person, the events are coming up. I'm sure I might see you in Cannes, I might see you in other places and whatever. But, Will, are you ready to get back in person? Are you going to be as dapper as you ever were?
It's not looking good. I tried on a couple of my suits because I went in the office last week. I was like, I'm coming back out. Like, we're gonna do this again. I like to wear my suits. It wasn't pretty. There's gonna have to be a lot of cardio in my future, and hopefully that coincides with, sort of a back to office movement. I got to kind of time this very differently. But yeah, it's.
Will, maybe that's one of the biggest collaborations you and I can have, is to get back into old jacket form, because I will have to say I'm in the same boat, and I really just, it's almost like a failure to go out and buy newer suits with just a little bit different cut, just because you can't fit in, So, all right, I hope the next time I see you, you're as dapper as ever. Will, thank you and I do really think that in the last 50 minutes here, we have covered a lot of ground in terms of, some of the myths that are out there and some of those things. And I really appreciate you shooting straight. I really think that this was a great conversation. So,
Wonderful.
Will, thank you so much. Looking forward to future ones.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for joining in, if you're listening to this live. And if not, just listen to our podcast as we release Beeler.Cast. And thank you so much.